Colony worlds are known as a great place for those who just don't want to be disturbed to just disappear into the middle of the universe. One would say middle of nowhere squared, but when you think about it, nope, it's middle of nowhere cubed. On the colonization planet Alibaba 4, the majority of the population are called Gorgger. They're a reptilian species which are approximately human-sized but a bit thinner. The minority is called Blanco, a species that is mainly human characteristics, however have a bit of a animalistic side, as their ears are not the same as humans, and they tend to have things like feathers or fur. Then, of course, there are the humans that arrive. Colonial planets being terraformed is not an easy thing to do, but that means most of what's there is scientists and farmers. Human terraforming ship arrived very soon after the colonists made landfall. When the terraforming ship arrives, it took less than 1 local year for entire valleys where the humans were to be covered in green. The main influence and the main change was the fact that on board each of these colonization ships are massive drills that are constantly going, constantly loaded by roughnecks as they dug deeper and deeper to get a hold of the most valuable resources during colonization and terraforming: water. Due to this, the influence of the drills and irrigation, underground reservoirs were immediately tapped, and this made the speed of terraforming very, very impressive. So much so that many of the other species that seemed to come in would say, "Hey, you can actually see green from space now." Humans are always working on the soil. They would offer to help others if they wanted some sort of farming. However, the offer was always declined at first. The Blanco that moved closer to work with the humans, since they have no support from the Blanco government at all, they're kind of out on their own, just like the humans. Yet they were surprised at the severe lack of government support. As it turns out, humans had paid to make the colonization ship happen, along with the terraforming ship they actually rented. Still, the humans with advanced agricultural techniques were able to produce more food on the planet than they could possibly need. Because of this, there was constant trade with the Blanco, and a nearly carnivorous species in and of themselves were always willing to work and be paid in food. More than once, Blanco would actually offer themselves just to get a full belly for the first time in months, sometimes for themselves, sometimes for their families. Realizing the situation really quick, the Blanco began working as live-in help, and eventually integrating so much into human society that until you looked for differences in the body, you really couldn't tell them apart. Blanco females are even more prideful than their male counterparts in Blanco society, and were a bit upset that they were pushed towards more domestic duties. At least they had a full belly, and they also were told and realized that the best way to a male Blanco's heart was not through the sternum as they first thought, but through the stomach. And it works for human too. However, it should be noted that mixed couples are so rare there's only 2 on the entire planet. Humans actually are considered, as the Blancos say, one of our pride, which is actually the greatest compliment their entire species could ever give you. Despite how well the Blanco actually worked with human, the Gorger were not so nice. They received much more aid from government, and they were also very prideful, which made them distant, and yet always willing to trade for one particular human foodstuffs. Being reptilians, the sight of what humans called chickens was enough to get their attention right away. The smell of roasted bird was enough to make them drool. And hearing those birds actually produced eggs every day got them almost shaking in anticipation. When Gorger's supplies actually began to run low because they were only given assistance for so long, they began to barter pretty heavily, but human farmers hardly ever parted with a full bird. This was simply because the colony was just starting. There was no set up area for these. There was no big nesting areas, no big hatcheries. It takes time to incubate the eggs, to hatch them, to raise them to maturity, which makes them actually very, very precious commodities at this point. However, this did not stop the post-pubescent gorgers, which should be noted are basically teenagers by human standards, from raiding chicken houses at night. They would always justify it by saying they won't miss a few. It didn't matter if it was chickens, ducks, geese, turkey. All eggs became highly demand product, mainly because eggs in their culture are an extreme delicacy, and now they could get their claws on all of it. The look of elation on a gorger's face as they ate a single egg revealed everything any human needed to know. At first, the humans turned a blind eye because they knew, hey, they're just hungry. That's until the nightly raids didn't actually just pick up 2, 3 eggs out of each of these pens. No, now it was grabbing them by the dozen. The humans and the Blancos sent out a word of warning to all those in charge, and eventually just simply locked the chicken houses. And this seemed to stop them cold, as a padlock needs to actually be ripped off unless you know the combination. At first they used key locks, but it turns out that Gorgons are pretty good at picking locks. Unfortunately, when it got switched over to combination locks, that is when humans would go out in the morning and find the locks either completely broken, ripped off, dismantled in some way, or just completely torn off. Sometimes the door would just be gone. And of course, this would scare the birds, and everybody knows that the scared birds don't lay. And when the scared birds were not laying eggs, then birds themselves came up missing. Everybody said, oh, they got bold. They messed around. Eventually, the humans and the Blancos set up an ambush. But this ambush was not to kill at all, but to simply capture. Those that ran found a tranquilizer dart in their tail, and, well, they didn't get very far. That next morning, all the perpetrators were tied to posts in wagons, each of them tied down so tight that you would think that they would start to lose feeling in their hands and feet, and even their tails were tied down, each of them with a sign hung around their neck that simply read, Thief. The humans left the wagons in the center of town. When the elders came out to protest, the humans simply said, don't ever ask for anything else. We will no longer trade if this is what you're going to do. And from here on out, this is the only bird you're going to get from us. Obviously flipping them the finger as the humans walk away. It wasn't long at all, less than 2 local days, before the Gorger elders actually came over trying to strike a deal, and eventually a deal was struck. The young that decided to do something really stupid would work off their debts. Trade restrictions would be lifted if this was the case, and they did not try anything stupid. The human governor of the colony decided to get some input from everyone around him, and they all simply nodded. The governor then turned to the elders and said, fair deal. Just realize that if your folks steal from us again, they might come back missing some pieces. Though I will say it's a good thing they didn't go over and try to steal our cattle. With this, the Gorgers looked over to the large mammals and were like, we wouldn't want to take them, but now they've stirred our interest. One of the elders simply asked, why would that be so bad? The human simply raised up high and said, rustling cattle has always been a hangable offense. It was there that all the Gorgers realized something. The humans are nice until they're not. Don't piss them off. And if they offer you food, you're free to take it. But for the love of all that is holy, never, ever try to take the food off their plate. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this short story. Now before I go, I need to say that today's winner has been Erica Gem, and EdgeSite missed it by just a few seconds. I also need to send out a giant thank you to every single one of the supporters of this channel. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. And they are Sir, MTF Guard, SS Demon, Brian Kemp, Guardian Sage, Douglas Scarborough, Erica Gem, and Julius Boone. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.